us. We are a show that's kind of about science and faith and asking and answering questions posed by skeptics and those who are struggling with faith or struggling to reconcile science and faith, or in the process of learning and growing. And so we just want to be here as part of that conversation. We bring on different voices to share their stories and tell about their journey. Today we're going to be talking about deconstruction and beyond. Just what does a faith journey look like when it changes? So glad you're with us. If you're watching live on Facebook or on YouTube, you could ask questions in the chat boxes and we'll try to answer your questions if we have time. And glad you're able to join us. We've had a little bit of a break. The month of May was pretty busy for a lot of our guests since they're professors and winding down the school year. So now that we're into summer, we have maybe a little more relaxed schedule. And today we actually have two guests with us. So far we have joining us Leah Gilbertson. And Leah is a lecturer teaching geology at Southern Illinois University and a Lutheran turned non-denominational charismatic, turned Advent Christian Lutheran, turned non-denominational progressive Christian. And later on joining us will be Joelle, who is a clinical social worker by profession and a paleontology nerd and caver by passion. Currently, she's staying home to care for young children. She was raised a very by-the-book Seventh-day Adventist and turned Unitarian Universalist and turned progressive Seventh-day Adventist, a faith journey where fossils played a part. So this is all going to be about faith journeys and growing in our faith and reevaluating some of what we learned as kids and maybe throwing out that which is toxic or not working, and all with kind of the goal of following Jesus along the way. So anyway, welcome, Leah. Glad you're here with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me. Appreciate this.
And you're originally from Minnesota, right?
Yes, I am. I'm up here in Glenwood area,
all right,
which is about 2.5 hours northwest of the Twin Cities.
Okay. But you teach in Southern Illinois?
Yeah, I teach in Carbondale, Southern Illinois University, and I've been there about 4 years now, I guess. So.
Southern,
back here for the summers.
You know, as a guy from Chicago, Southern was known as the party school in Illinois, Leah.
Was it?
Yeah. Yeah, back in the day, especially around Halloween. You have a big Halloween gig, right?
I know it's weird, but I don't really partake.
That's okay. We do have Joelle with us. I did want to say that welcome, Joelle, and we are streaming on both YouTube and Facebook. So if anyone has a question or a comment along the way, we will try and get you in. But everything seems to be going great. So welcome, Joelle. Oh, we don't have your audio right now. So maybe you can try working on that and let us know when that comes in.
Well, in that case, yeah. Leah, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background, both academic and spiritual?
Sure. Yeah, so academically, undergraduate was, am I allowed to say my school names?
Oh, sure.
It was University of Minnesota Morris. It was a great little liberal arts school in Morris, Minnesota. Giving a plug for it there. And then, so I was a music and a geology major, and which means, of course, I am a rock musician, but dum-dum. And sorry, but not sorry. And then I went to Western Washington University for my graduate degree in geology, which I also got another graduate degree in music. And then I attempted a PhD at University of Maine, but by then I'd been to so much school that I was really burned out. So I just went right into teaching, taught at Indiana University Kokomo as a lecturer, and then several schools after that. And now I've been at Southern Illinois University for about the past 4 years. Spiritually, though, like I said, we started as a Lutheran, raised Lutheran. I was born again, Spirit-filled my very third day of college, and was really involved in those kinds of churches for a couple of decades. And then the move, when I went to University of Maine, I started going to an Advent Christian church, and that kind of moved me back into more Protestant or not non-denominational, but more like Lutheran or the more well-known churches, I guess. And then since then, just through the deconstruction, I guess I just haven't really returned to more evangelical churches. So.
Okay.
Joelle, are you with us?
Hey.
Oh, great. You're on. Yeah.
Woohoo! All
right.
Yeah.
All right.
Maybe we can ask you to do the same. Just kind of give us your quick summary on your background and where you were at before we ask you both of you about your deconstruction.
Okie dokie. Yeah. I'm raised Seventh-day Adventist. I attended Adventist schools, kindergarten through college, actually. I got my master's degree in social work, and I am a licensed clinical social worker, though I am staying home with children right now. But yeah, I was always pretty like, it was a pretty fundamental by the book, and that was what was normal for me. So.
Well, deconstruction has become a buzzword. It's become very popular, and as far as a conversation point in at least evangelical circles lately. But it means different things to different people. Leah, maybe we could start with you, and you could tell us what you understand deconstruction to be, and what's your relationship to it.
I guess I understand it more as kind of re-examining what our faith is, and for me, it's looking at really much of my deconstruction, at least more recently, has been focused on the person of and the ministry of Jesus Christ, and what all of that means, and how does my background faith, how does that fit in with all of what I read him saying. But my journey has been, I was deconstructing long before it was a word really that was applied to this, from the moment that I was in my first geology class, learning about the age of the earth. So it happened scientifically, it happened politically, and then more recently, it's more of a spiritual journey. So it's been a long journey in my case.
Would it be right to presume that both of you have kind of similar backgrounds? I mean, did you grow up in churches that kind of taught young earth creationism, or just presumed it?
My church was very, very much into young earth creation. Like, it's very, like, there's no getting around it. There are probably other Adventists who, are not into the young earth creation, but like going through school, it was all about, the earth is 6,000 years old. We are sure of it. Geology supports this. Science supports this. That's what the evidence says, and that's what the Bible says, and the Bible is super clear. And also, like, the Seventh-day thing is really important in that denomination. So the 7-day creation, like, it all hangs together so perfectly that it all has to be like literally exactly that. So that was a big thing.
And
I would say,
go ahead,
Go ahead, Leah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. As a Lutheran, I don't think we really spent a whole lot of time on that. And then, in fact, we've never really, any church I've been into has never really emphasized it at all, but it might be there in the background, but I've never heard a sermon on it. But it definitely was, especially when I got into the more charismatic churches, that it was definitely 6,000 years, 6 days creation.
Our friend Christy Hempel made a few comments in the same thread where we bumped into you all. So to give the audience a kind of understanding of how we all came together, we are all associates in a similar groups that talk about the intersection between faith and science. And there was a post directly about somebody's deconstruction, and they had deconstructed out of the faith. They had deconverted. And this is where the conversation led Christine and I to notice some of your comments and want you on the show. Along with that is a friend of ours that we've had on the show previously, Christy Hempel. And tell me if this resonates with you ladies. She said in that thread that she heard someone say they prefer unbundling to deconstruction. It's not moving to a less biblical worldview to realize that some of the things you had bundled in with your Christianity and Bible interpretation were really just cultural or political in-group assumptions that had nothing to do with or with antithetical to following Christ. So I'm going to throw this out to both of you. It sounds like science might have been the first stumbling block that started you at least in a different trajectory on your faith journey. But what other stumbling blocks have you avoided along the way, or possibly used as stepping stones to move onto a different trajectory? I should probably ask Leah first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, science really was the first, but even while I was kind of moving away from young Earth creationism, it never really was a huge issue in the churches that I was in. We never really talked about that. And so it wasn't something that I worried about losing faith over, because nobody was... There was that underlying, it's either God or science, but no one really pushed that on me too much. And then it became more political. But yeah, I'd say science was kind of the first step in the process.
Can I share a little bit about mine? Mine was really mostly science. For me, it really started with cats. I've always been obsessed with cats ever since I was like a baby or a toddler. And when I was in college, getting my social work degree randomly, I found out about these other things that were not cats, like nimravids. They are, they lived in the Oligocene, which I was like, the Earth is 6,000 years old. What is this? They were just like cats, but they had, like, there were some that were like cheetahs. There were some that they filled the roles of like bobcats. There were some that were big like lions and tigers. There were some that were saber-toothed, like this true saber-toothed cats that went extinct recently. So I was like, why? And that is that one thing that just started me down the path of looking into geology, paleontology. Like, I was like, how? I can't make sense of this, because like I had a very active devotional life through all of my, what do you want to call it, like deconstruction process, if you want to call it that. Like, when I was going through all this and questioning all this, like I never skipped a day of reading my Bible and praying, like every single morning for like 12 years. I never skipped a day of it. And so I was really struggling with this. I was like, how? And it was weird for that to be this one thing. Like, this is a cast of a Hoplophonius skull. One of these non-cats that were almost cats. It's like, why would God make cats and then also make these other things simultaneously and I'll have them live on the earth? It's like, nothing makes sense. I've got to make this make sense. And so I started digging deeper, and I started trying to find, like, okay, like, how, let's make, like, I'm sure everyone has assured me that the science does back up young Earth creationism. That was a mistake, because I started figuring out, I'm like, oh, good, I'll go to this, I'll find out what their sources, and I dig into the sources, and it was like, oh, this is the opposite of what this creationist source is purporting for it to say. Like, what? And I was having so much trouble with it, I couldn't make it make sense, and it just opened up, rabbit hole after rabbit hole. It wasn't that there was this one thing where bing, like, oh, now I realize the Earth is not 6,000 years old. It was more like mountains and mountains and mountains of things. It just becomes so undeniable. But the problem with that was that I had always been told if the Earth is not 6,000 years old, then the whole thing is false. The whole thing comes crumbling down, like the story of Jesus, everything. And I had so much trouble with that because, and the creationists were quoting like atheists who say, you might as well not, you might as well throw the whole thing out. It's like, what? I had my relationship with Jesus, and it was such a struggle. Anyway, that was science for me was the main one. Not to go on a tangent there, but that's what this little guy is.
Well, the science piece in a way is so easy, right? Because the evidence for an old Earth and evolution is so very abundant, right? In any discipline, in any place you look, it's if a false dichotomy, if a dichotomy that it's either science or Christianity, it's hard to say no to the science. It's just so abundant.
That false dichotomy drives so many people off.
Let me interrupt
it
there,
sure does.
because what you said is true for 3 out of 4 of this picture, because you 3 are all in science fields, but well, or at least
social science. I don't know.
passionate about science. But there's a lot of us that grew up that didn't really have a background in science, and we did accept that kind of false dichotomy that it's God or the or the atheist evolutionists. So it wasn't so obvious for some of us, Christine, because even if we felt we were well read, we really only read Christian apologists on the whole issue. So, and they are all anti-evolution, almost just about down to a man. So it might have been a little bit more difficult for some of us. But you bring up a good question, because I think the other side of that coin is, if the science doesn't cure you of that false dichotomy, maybe the wrestling with the Bible is the other thing that people struggle with. But I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth. I'm going to let you finish what you were going to say, Christine. I just wanted to say I wish it was easy for me, but it took me a long time to finally... I mean, I hit my head on every rung of the creationist ladder before I finally was shaken by the lapels by Francis Collins. Yeah.
I didn't really mean to make it seem easy, because science isn't easy and math is not easy either. It takes a lot of work to learn and study scientific evidence and details and read papers. It's a difficult subject. In fact, I think that's one of the reasons why young Earth creation is so very successful, is because it's so simple and simplistic. You don't have to do anything difficult. You just have a superficial view, and that's all. But when you do dive in, when you do take a class and you learn how things work, it's after you've put in the work that you can't go back. You can't unlearn or forget what you've learned.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like it wasn't as big of an issue for Leah as it was for Joelle in her background. So let me ask you this to Joelle, and then you could comment, Leah. Joelle, was there a point when you were caught up in that false dichotomy of choosing, the Bible or what you were learning, that your faith was absolutely in crisis? Were you absolutely ready to follow the truth out of Christianity?
I mean, absolutely. It was terrifying. When I first started looking into it, I was getting scared, because I kept heard of well, so and so became a marine biologist and now they're atheists. All this, it keeps happening. Why is this happening? It's like, I have to look into this. I'm compelled. Why did God make me so passionate about this? And then I was like, I've been praying about it, and I was like, if my faith can't handle reality, what kind of faith is that? It has to be able to handle literal reality. But it's terrifying. And when you realize that, I was wrong. The things I was taught were wrong. And the beautiful little box that fits together so perfectly, it doesn't work. It all, that falls apart. Reality can't fit in it. God doesn't, there's not room for him in this. So does that mean he doesn't exist? And it's actually terrifying. It feels like a death. It really does. And I see why so many people mourn their faith and go their separate ways. And I don't think it's fair to say that someone who hits that point and ends up off the off ramp and goes to atheism, I don't think it's fair to say they never had a true spiritual walk to begin with. I know, like, I really wrestled with it. And even then, it was a scary time. And I could see how it could go a different way. So yeah, it feels really bad before you realize that, okay, maybe God is actually bigger than this box and this is something else.
Mhm.
This is not, he doesn't fit in it. But when that process is happening, it's terrifying. And it's very, unless you have a community already of people who are also deconstructing or questioning, it's very isolating, because everybody you talk to,
Mhm.
if they're kind about it, they're still really concerned. Like, oh
Mhm.
my word, my child or my friend or my relative is about to become an atheist and they're not going to go to heaven, and I have to convince them and scare them into it no matter what. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's a scary experience. It's kind of traumatic in some ways. Like, and I feel my heart feel like the part of the passion of my heart is like, it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to choose this either or, this false dichotomy. Like, it didn't have to be so hard. If somebody would have been like, hey, you know what, like, and it was like a tweet from Bill Nye or somebody who's like, the thing about young earth creationism, it insults, the millions of Christians who, who believe in, I don't know if he said evolution or believe that the earth is old or whatever. Like, the thing, like, it insults all the Christians who believe, like, wait, there are Christians who believe that? Like, I was taught like it was either this or that. And thank you, Bill Nye, for helping save my faith. I mean, really, like, it was
Mhm.
it was a hard, it shouldn't have been that hard. And so that's the burden on my heart, is like, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to believe, if you don't want to look into geology and all that stuff, okay, but like, maybe we should stop being so scary about it. Because making it a salvation issue is making it a salvation issue, when really this, like, Jesus is who we should be focusing on. The other stuff, you know, it's really interesting and important, but maybe we don't need to say that the other stuff is just as important as Jesus just because we think so.
Lee, I think I cut you off. You wanted to jump in there.
Sorry.
Did you want an opportunity to
Oh,
comment?
yeah, I didn't want to imply that I didn't struggle with this. In fact, so like when I said that churches, for the most part, the churches that I was in, it was never really a huge issue because they never really spoke about it from the pulpit, and then I just never talked about it unless asked, because, like Joelle said, it's very alienating, and I knew what people. I kind of had an idea what people were thinking. But when I said that I first started deconstructing when I was in geology science class in 1988, what had happened was the professor had come in with one of those. I don't know if you remember the printer paper where it was all connected and perforated and it had the circles on it. I mean, nobody who's younger than 30 is going to know these, but he had put that up all the way around the perimeter of the science building, and he said this represents the age of the universe, which was 15 billion years. And I just thought, it's 6,000 years. How could it be 15 billion years? And he put the significant dates on there all the way around and said, this last little thumbnail bit, that's your life. And it really blew me away just to even think about how could it be that big. And then what I realized is that I was thinking, well, God can't be bigger than that. And then I realized, but wait a minute, he is bigger than that. He's eternal. And so it really started just a really much larger understanding of faith. But then with that, I became a geology major because of that class. And I was living with my pastor and his wife at the time, who were very staunch young earth creationists. So I would be in my classes learning about all of this. It all makes sense, starting to understand how it works. And then I'd go home and they would say, well, you just have to believe it's 6,000 years. God can do that. And I'm like, yeah, I know he can. And so I was just going back and forth. And it was somewhat traumatic. I had to choose which I was going to believe. And this was all pre-prevalent internet. And so I didn't realize there just weren't any resources out there. I didn't know there were other people who thought like I did, who were questioning all of this. And like the whole process lasted like 20 years, really, from that to finally accepting, an old earth. That was the easier one to accept. And then eventually all of how evolution works. But that was a very long process.
So how does that make you feel about your church leaders, like the teachers and those who are saying that the earth is 6,000 years old and that that's a key part of Christianity? How does that make you feel like when they then talk about other subjects that maybe are also not very clear in scripture, or there are possible different interpretations or understanding? Does it affect your trust of them? Do you wonder if they are teaching accurately on other topics too? Let's start with Joelle.
Okay. It really, like, the whole process has definitely brought home to me, like, how much is based on our human interpretation of things. Um, you know, just, I don't know Hebrew and Greek, but I would go into the Bible and, like, look at the, like, Blue Letter Bible, look up the original words. I'm lucky. I had the internet. And so this was still rough. And this was, like, pre a lot of social media, too, before it was much talked about. But still, like, I could look up stuff and I'm like, there's like 5 different things this word could mean or whatever. Like someone had to pick their best guess. And then realizing that, okay, like the leaders of my church, like I feel tired just thinking about it. Like I could not ask them to go through this process. Like somebody would have to care enough. And a lot of people, it's scary. They don't want to do that. Once it's a can of worms that you've opened, you realize it's too obvious. Like, and I can see why people, they'll read a few articles where, there's a little gish gallop and it makes you feel clever. And it's like this, and this, and you're set. And they don't want to go any deeper. Like, okay, good. We don't have to look into this anymore. Like, we're done. I don't know. But yeah, it definitely, like, it makes me think, yeah, all of this is just based on how they're interpreting stuff. And maybe there's more than one valid way to interpret it because that was true of other things.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Leah?
Well, I feel it's kind of a stay in your lane sort of a thing, because science, if you don't know anything about science, maybe not talk about it and not judge it without knowing and understanding. It's that whole Dunning-Kruger thing where the less you understand something, the more you think you understand something, and the more opinionated you are about it. But I don't really blame the church leaders so much. I don't have any bad feelings about that just because I've seen these presentations that people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind make, and they're slick and they're well produced. And I wish my lectures were that well produced, and I can see how easily it is. If you don't know anything about science, it sounds really, really like it makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm not an astronomer, and I heard Hovind's arguments about astronomy, and I'm like, hey, that makes sense to me. And the astronomers, of course, are like, no, not at all. And so I can see how people can get kind of sucked into that and really believe that they understand something that they really don't have the scientific background for. Doesn't mean that they can't get the scientific background. I just think it's important to be open-minded and open-hearted and learn, and then try to understand it from the people who spend their lives, their entire days and lives studying this sort of thing. And to say all this with very little background, but yeah, they really are good at drawing people in with these really slick presentations, and so I can't blame people for getting sucked in like that.
Right. Especially if they're raised like kindergarten through college in a system where you really were never given a fair view of all that. They don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
The information is out there, but you have to go looking for it.
I do want to say we're having a lively conversation. I think it's over on YouTube between J.S. and Carmel Crunk. And Carmel Crunk correctly points out there are few apologists out there who accept evolutionary biology, and he mentions William Lane Craig. But some of the others that are mentioned, I'd more or less say they're more YouTube influencers than actual apologists. But it is a good point. William Lane Craig, Sentinel Apologetics, IP, and Randall Rouser says, Crunk, are there any others who accept it? And then somebody mentioned Joshua Swamidass. So you're holding up a book, Leah?
Oh,
Or I'm
this
sorry.
is one of my
Oh,
favorites.
well.
This is by Elizabeth A. Johnson. It's called Ask the Beasts, Darwin and the God of Love. Um, and I first listened to it on audiobook, and I think it's beautifully done. It's very encouraging to see some people working on that and some of the questions. There are some beautiful thoughts in there, like very biblical about, the word became flesh and dwelt among us, and the word for flesh that is used is not human, but like meat, like life, animals. Like, anyway, it's a very beautiful picture of like God's love for all creation, and it's a different way to look at it that is biblical. It's just a different interpretation from the one I was raised in. But there are people out there, and there are people who are thinking about this, and I think that's really good.
I do want to take a moment right now. This is going to sound like a commercial, but it's not. I want Christine to talk to us a little bit about the ASA conference coming up here in San Diego. And we will get back to your messages shortly and back to our interview. But Christine, you want to talk to us about this conference in San Diego?
Absolutely. So the American Scientific Affiliation is an organization for Christians who are professionals in scientific fields or theologians or pastors. And the scientific field is very broadly defined here and includes social sciences and engineering and medicine and like physics and chemistry and that sort of thing too. So Christians who are involved in scientific fields can join the ASA. And if you're not, but you're just a lover of science, you can become a friend of the ASA, and they're having a conference at the end of July. It begins on Friday, July 29th and goes through Monday, August 1st. There are a number of different plenary speakers, and the main subject or theme is human flourishing, which I think really fits into this topic of deconstruction or rebundling, in that the reason that's driving a lot of this deconstruction is a matter of human flourishing. How does our faith life and journey flourish when we're encountering issues that don't fit in with reality or don't seem to be reflective of Jesus? And there's maybe a period of adjustment. And I think that's actually pretty historical for Christianity. We see many times throughout the church where there have been adjustments and corrections into returning to a doctrine that's more faithful to how Jesus lived his life and his teachings. Even just like the Reformation had a huge impact both on birthing the Protestant traditions, and it even changed the way the Catholic tradition was at that time. So I think this human flourishing is a great topic this year, and if you're interested in attending the conference in person, that's not too late. There's registration still available at asa3.org, and also there's going to be live stream options and the possibility of buying like a package to watch the videos later. That's after the conference is on too.
Well, you bring up a good point that church history is filled with episodes of deconstruction, and usually at the time of the deconstruction, it's looked upon as something the devil is bringing about, and then in the rearview mirror, we see that it was actually probably a movement of the Spirit. So along those lines, in the second half of the conversation, I really want to focus on that. Has the church flubbed it? Where was the church when you guys were going through your doubt? How did they walk alongside you? I do want to share one more quote from our good friend, Christy Hempel, and she says this. It's something that both of you seem to imply. I saw someone on Twitter say it's not a crisis of faith, it's a crisis of trust. And I feel this sums up where I am at. Me and Jesus and the Bible and global Christianity are at a good place. My relationship with the church in America and the faith community I was raised in needs therapy. I've lost a lot of respect over the last several years for people I once loved and trusted because they've become, or maybe always have been, ignorant, racist, sexist, lying haters. I've extended so much benefit of the doubt over the years that was not deserved, and I'm done making excuses for people I thought were better than they were. I feel betrayed by a community I once felt I belonged to and existed in the center of. I find myself pushed to the fringes or treated as a threat now, but I don't feel like I or my views have changed much at all. I'm looking for a new we that fits. I would just add that we're all very grateful for Facebook groups like Answers to Answers in Genesis, where Christians and atheists and people who are questioning all come together, usually very civilly, and discuss these things. We're grateful for ministries like BioLogos that maybe wasn't in place, Leah, when you were in your first steps of deconstruction. But did that statement by Christy resonate with you too? And maybe you can each take us through how the church responded to your doubt. And we'll start with Leah.
Well, I was fortunate enough that in my spiritual deconstruction, I'd stumbled upon Jim Wallace's Sojourners online groups. And so I was commenting on there a lot, and there were several of us that we saw that we were like-minded, and we kind of broke off and made this this private Facebook group called The Cabal. And so we were able to discuss a lot of issues at that time. And then also at the same time, the church I was involved in Maine was, they had a lot of questions that they were asking. And so they weren't threatened by questions. And especially the pastor, who became a good friend and a mentor to me. And he encouraged my questions. He got me reading Brian McLaren and a lot of other authors like Brennan Manning and people like that there were no questions that he thought were off limits. And so at that point, I was really starting to think about Christianity, the intersection of that and politics, and kind of getting away from the political aspects. So these things were really supportive. I was in a pretty supportive environment, and really still am in a home group that I'm in. But since, as we know, the 2016 election, it's been, I resonate a lot with that quote, because so much has been really devastating for me, because I just feel like I don't know what happened to my faith. I don't know. I feel like a real outsider in a lot of ways, in the ways that she describes, and what I see in a lot of evangelical Christianity is I just don't know where Jesus is in it, and so it's been really difficult for me to. I do feel like an outsider within that aspect of Christianity now, but I'm fortunate to have had some like-minded people on the journey.
Joelle, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was never like super loud about this when I was going through some of the worst of these struggles. I feel like most, like I was talking to, family and friends and stuff. I talked to a few professors when I was in college when I was first starting this. Most were not very helpful. One was helpful. He encouraged me to, when I was reading the Bible, find verses that talk about God as creator. Emphasizing that was the most important thing. I think that was headed in the right direction. But no, I do feel a little bit like, there's I'm not even trying to shop right now for a church that fits exactly how I believe. I sometimes I know, like my spiritual walk is what it is, and I'm here. I think people, if they see me in church, they look at me and they assume that I believe exactly how they do. And I wonder if they see this video. I wonder how if they're going to look at me different. Probably. I do sometimes, when I'm asked to talk about fossils or caves and stuff like that to kids. I leave out age of the earth questions. I leave out evolution. I just talk about, this is cool. This is this animal. This is what it did. I try to respect that boundary too. Like, I'm not in a teaching position, and I'm not going to try to, influence anybody. I guess if somebody asks me, I will tell them anything they want to know.
One of the responses that really the church has foisted on those going through deconstruction is kind of it starts with shame and questions. And I think this is why so many people end up leaving the faith, is because they feel pushed out. They constantly, one of the main answers for people who deconvert all the way, who slide all the way off, is that they didn't feel that their experience in their faith gave them any room for doubt or questions. And I think this is why so many people in the science world end up walking away, because they see kind of a self-policing in the scientific method, more of a transparency there where it's kind of built in that we question things, that we try and pull them apart and see if they can stand up. And in the Christian world, that's first looked at as a lack of faith, or you're a troublemaker, rabble-rouser, and you're kind of pushed to the fringes, as Christy says. And then sometimes you're accused of never being of us, that, well, they left because they were never of us. And some of these people have been pastors for 20 years and and have had ministries. But one of the other responses is that there's a lack of love. Now, this came up in our conversation, Leah, and you answered it. I blurred out the person you were answering, but the accusation for the person who had left the faith was, well, love will wax cold in the end times, and many will fall away. You said, I don't think that's what's happening here. If you listen to people's stories, it's more about finding authenticity and rejecting something that doesn't ring true, or sadly, for far too many people, has been toxic in their lives. Mm-hmm. For many, it's not that their love has turned cold, but rather they are rejecting a love that itself has turned cold. Are you saying here, kind of what I've said before, that it's not atheism that makes atheists, but it's toxic Christianity?
I think in some cases, absolutely. I think toxic Christianity has that impact of turning people away from God. And just as you said, I mean, people who have questions, if they come to people that they trust in the church and want to work through those questions, and nobody is allowing those questions, and then they bring in the shame and they accuse them of falling away and backsliding and all of those things, it has the effect of pushing people away, and they don't see the authenticity that is there in the faith, because there's been too much toxicity in one way or another.
I think that was very well put about, it's not the people who are deconstructing, it's not that their love has turned cold. But yeah, they're turning away from a love that has turned cold, and that's not the love of God. That is the conditional love of humans. And so many so many people I've talked to who have deconstructed, whether it's all the way or or they've changed a lot. Like, I've changed a lot in my beliefs. Like, those people, like, they seem to be like the ones who are authentically searching. they will not take a pat answer. They won't lie to themselves. They won't just be like, okay, this is comfortable. They really are seekers, and that's a hard road to hoe, but yeah.
Chiming in from YouTube is Dr. Clark Van Gilder, a regular listener, and he said, as a nun done, I felt like a leper inside the camp until I decided to leave the camp. Christine, I know that your family has been through kind of a similar experience at a previous church where your children were kind of ostracized in their youth group. How can the church, and this is for all three of you ladies, Christine, you can chime in since you've been a victim, what must we do to stem the hemorrhaging that we're seeing, mostly of young people from the church who are finding it to be an inhospitable place, and certainly a place that does not show the unconditional love of Christ?
I wish I had an answer. I'm not in a place where I have an answer right now. I have started going to a new church. I go some, but I don't know that I'm ready to invest in the people yet. I don't know that I have a trust. I have trust issues right now with the church. I really do. Not an issue with Jesus, not an issue. Even with the Bible, I'm kind of at a peaceful place with the Bible, able to accept it, kind of what I see it as it is right now, maybe differently than I did when I was younger. But right now, I just don't know that I am trusting people. And
wow.
Any want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know your. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know your family's story, Christine, but I'm really sorry that you're going through all this. And I feel like the church, oftentimes we're just so threatened by people who have questions. And that's what kids do, is they ask a lot of questions. It's part of them learning. And yeah.
Well, I'm interested to know. I remember in that thread watching the two of you interact with others. There seemed to be a lot of conflict from within the church to some of your comments. Do you find that is more notably true, that you get more pushback from fellow believers than you do, say, from people who've deconverted?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
If people have deconverted, what's there to be scared of anymore?
right.
Like, if they've already deconstructed, if they've already left, why push back? Like, it's the people who are still in. They don't want their box to have cracks in it. They don't want to hear it, and of course they need to push back. Like, it's terrifying. Like, they have to fight it because they're defending their position. And anyway. It's too scary. Like, that makes sense. If they've already left, then what's there to be scared of? They've already done that questioning.
Yeah, it's very, very scary for people to start questioning their beliefs. They think that they're going to be on this slippery slope to atheism, and it's not true. It doesn't have to be that way. And so, just in fact, if you don't answer these questions or start investigating, what happens is it builds up to the point where a lot of people just throw the whole thing away, and it does lead to atheism because they're not addressing these questions. And so there's that threatening aspect of asking questions is really, it actually brings you to a deeper faith. And so I'm really appreciative of my pastor and my church that allowed those questions to flourish. if I were to ask those questions in some of my other churches, and I'm not saying I don't love those people and love those churches, I absolutely do. I would probably even return to them if I had the opportunity. It's a different part of the country. But if I were to bring those up, they would be really strong about just pulling me back into the fold and don't ask those questions, swallow it and believe kind of thing. And so there is that issue of who you trust in the church to even talk about these things too. And so that's why things can be really alienating. And I'm very thankful that I do have a faith community that does allow questioning and discussing these issues.
Christine and I
kind of
have talked
terrified
a number of times. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Joelle.
I was just
Yeah.
say I'm kind of terrified because I recently came back. I didn't really attend church for a lot of years. I had kids, and I was going to a Unitarian Universalist congregation, and bless his heart, good old Ivan Corddry. He gets up in front of this congregation and he says, "We're talking today." He's like, "We're going to talk about making peace with where you come from," and everyone goes, "Oh no," because Unitarian Universalist, it's a hodgepodge of everybody who's left all these different faiths or atheists or whatever. It was a great little church. Anyway, so because of that though, I decided, well, I'm going to go to this little church in my denomination in the city where I was living at the time, and they were really nice and it was good. And so I've only recently come back, and so I'm hearing about these experiences. And I'm like, well, shoot, I wonder if I'm about to have a bad experience. If people are going to hear about this and be like, oh no, kick her out. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I just want my kids to be able to have this community. It's kind of terrifying, honestly.
Yeah.
I do feel like one or two bad apples can make it a really bad experience. And if something like that does happen, I hope that there are others who would be like, hey, like, we still want you here or something. I don't know. I'm just recently come back, so I don't know how that's going to go.
Joelle, you commented that during your deconstruction, you wrote, "My husband was worried about me. My parents were concerned also. People would ask me, why do you have to keep looking up stuff about that? Why do you have to keep studying paleontology? Is that an idol for you?" And I told him that I felt like a faith that couldn't handle reality wasn't worth having. And if I didn't keep following the search for truth, I would always wonder. For whatever reason, God had made me infinitely curious about his creation. So why should I be scared of looking at reality? I felt that at least my relationship with Jesus was real anyway. It's a very strong comment about your faith holding
It's
up
really
to
great.
reality. But you point out that there are many who don't want to open certain doors. I think that's revealing is that there's a great deal of insecurity with even people who think that they are Christian apologists. Christine and I have often talked about that the verse that inspires apologetics actually says to be ready to give every man who asks, right, a reason for the hope that is within you. And that hope that is within us is a person. It's Jesus Christ. It's not the Kalam cosmological argument. But it seems that most of apologetics is formed on arguing people or reasoning them people in an enlightenment-like style back into the church. And some critics have said it really doesn't have any effect outside of the choir loft. In other words, that it inspires a lot of what our Calvinist friends would call cage stage personalities, but it doesn't really reach the lost as maybe Lewis was reached by Tolkien through wonder and imagination. So when you have fellow Christians saying, don't open that door and why do you have to push, what's your response to that? How do you talk to somebody who's in that kind of a fear-based circumstance?
Who wants to go first?
I never know who to start with.
Joelle, you go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sweet. This is God's creation. I remember a book that my grandparents had that was like nature, God's other book. And like this, like if God made all of this, he made life itself, he made us, and he made all of this stuff. Like, this is like, what is there to be afraid of? If like God is not going, he didn't make everything in a way that's going to mislead us, like on purpose, like, make all these, anyway, I won't even get into it, but all the different ways that science supports the earth being old. Why would God make this in a way that's going to mislead us? Like this, God made this. It's not some vast conspiracy of, people faking all this stuff. Like, this is out there. You can go look for yourself. And it's beautiful. God made this universe, and he made all of life and the story of life. So maybe it's longer than you thought. Maybe it is. Maybe it's bigger. Maybe God is bigger than we thought. If we don't understand anything, I mean, sometimes we don't have the black and white answers. Sometimes there's uncertainty. It is terrifying, but like, God, this is God's creation. And why do I have to keep looking into it? Well, why should I be afraid to? If I'm afraid to do that, like, that's whatever. For some reason, God gave me a passion for learning about this stuff. And if, like, he should be able to walk me through it. If somebody doesn't want to look into it, they don't have to, but the information is out there.
Leah, did you have a comment? And then I want to see if Christine, are we back? Are you back, Christine?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, okay. So Leah, if you have a comment on that, and then I want to give Christine the microphone because I've been hogging it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would just echo that, because as a geologist, I'm studying rocks, of course, and my favorite are minerals. And minerals, if you see a mineral that has formed naturally, it's this beautiful geometric shape, and they're pristine and beautiful. And I've always seen God in that. And I don't see it as a scientist. I don't talk that way as a scientist, but I talk that way as a Christian, that I see God in God's creation. And when I finally started learning about evolution and how evolution works, and how it's this beautiful balancing act between God's dynamic world that he created, that was able to change, that animals are able to adjust to those changes so that they don't go extinct. And you start to see how all of these spheres in the world all work together, intricately balanced. And it's just amazing. I feel like when I'm studying that, I'm studying the mind of God. And also, I mean, why study science? Well, I mean, we wouldn't have the internet if we weren't studying science. And there's a lot of reasons that people study geology that all of society benefits from. So to put science down means that you can't. Are you going to just not have computers? Or you're not going to have lights? You're not going to drive? I mean, all of these things. I don't understand why people are so anti-science. It's a frustration of mine as well.
Yeah. So sometimes it seems to me like Christians, I think people in general, the simplest life is sometimes where we end up, right? We don't want to spend a lot of extra time working hard at things. We have a daily routine, and we just kind of live in our daily routine. And to push against nuances, to try to understand things that are complicated, it takes a lot of work. And I think a lot of people just don't have the bandwidth to do that, right? They're just trying to make it through each day and don't have the bandwidth. And I think that feeds into an idea that truth is something simple. It's just this, I want this simple life. I want this nice, tidy, pat answer. These nice little boxes like you were talking about, Joelle, that everything fits nice in this little box, and kind of just ignore any of the pieces that aren't quite fitting. Do you see that? Does that seem to resonate with what you've seen in some people who maybe they don't want to accept the scientific ideas on climate change because it's messy and it would mean we need to do something about it? Or they don't want to learn about the different rocks because they demonstrate that Earth is a lot more complicated in its development than a tidy little God poofed it into existence 6,000 years ago. And as far as evolution, that means that there was death and predation and disease since the beginning of life. And that's hard to wrestle with those ideas.
It is messier.
It's
It is
messier.
messier. And
Well,
salvation and God's love, a child could understand that, but that doesn't mean that a child could necessarily understand all of reality itself. Like, just because, the gospel itself is simple enough for even a small child to, okay, God loves me and, wants to save me and all this stuff. That's great. That doesn't mean that, like, the story of everything in the whole universe is that simple. The beauty of it is it's also complex enough that, we could study it forever. It doesn't have to be, either or. But reality itself is sometimes kind of messy. And yeah, ain't nobody got time for that. I couldn't start this journey right now, and I have 3 young children.
Right. Yeah. I also think sometimes Christians equate truth in the Bible with a literal historical event that occurred and was precisely recorded exactly the way it happened. Otherwise, it's not true. And so if you talk about a passage of scripture and they want to know, do you believe it? Do you think it's true? Don't you just accept this plain reading as this true thing? And that's maybe not, it's maybe a more overly simplistic view of what's true, and doesn't look at all the nuances of a passage or the genre.
When you grow up, though, hearing that from not just parents, but, all your Sunday school teachers and your youth pastors and your pastors, that's the kind of climate you're in. And it's an us and them world.
Yeah.
It really is a dichotomous thinking world that you're sucked into. I think I wanted to build on that kind of sentiment, though, and ask you a hard question that many struggle with, and that is, we've all seen people we know and love deconstruct to the point of deconversion. They've left the faith, and we have great respect for them because they're not hard-hearted or lacking love or leaving the faith because they want to have hedonistic sex, guilt-free hedonistic sex, which is a lot of people on the way out the door, Christians on the way out the door. If shame doesn't work, they'll shun them. And those are the 2 cards they play. So let me ask you this question. We have a lot of those people who listen to our show. So if they were to ask you, why are you still a Christian? Joelle, you quoted Bill Nye. I think all of you would agree with me that there's a lot of times that we are in much more in agreement with the atheist in the conversation than we are some of our fellow believers when it comes to maybe 90% of the topics we talk about. So what has kept you in the fold? What can't you let go of? Why do you still consider yourself, or if you do, a Christian or at least a Christ follower or admirer? And
I can't deny my experience with Jesus. And I know it could just be brain chemicals, and I could just be the way the human brain is. I know it could be, but I can't deny my experience with him as something that is real. So I can't speak for other people either. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to say, well, you must have not had a real experience because you didn't end up Christian or whatever. Like, I'm going to say that. Like, but here I am because I can't deny my own experiences, and like, I know that that's true for me, and I know that, but I also know that reality itself is true. So
yeah, and it's Jesus. It comes down to Jesus for me as well. The whole question about truth. I mean, people get bogged down into looking at the Bible through scientific lenses and saying that truth is scientific truth, but Jesus said that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And I just find that his teachings about the kingdom of God, that it's a kingdom that he ushered onto earth and is still arriving on earth, that he describes in his Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, and that the people that he values are the least of these. And it's just the exact opposite of how society sees what we value. We value money, we value power, He values people who mourn, who the meek, all people who are peacemakers. And to me, that is truth. I find that very truthful, and that's what I can't let go of. And I read the lens. He is the lens through which I understand all of Scripture. And it's not a scientific thing. It's a spiritual truth.
Jesus is radical. I mean, really.
He's rad. Jesus rocks.
Yeah, I think that spiritual component of people is something that makes us distinguished from the animal kingdom. Maybe we can make a case that dolphins or bonobos or highly complex other animals have some amount of spirituality, but not in the same way that humans, not to the same extent, for sure. The way we think about an afterlife, the way we think about spiritual topics, and that does set us apart from humans. It is a step in our evolutionary path that's different than where other animals are, at least at this point in time. And I don't think we should just dismiss that. That is part of what makes us human, that we have spiritual thoughts and connections and desires.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation today, ladies. We're right at about an hour. I do want to sneak in one more comment from YouTube because Carmel Crunk had a lot of good comments, and I can't get them all in, but I'll leave you with her last one where she says, someone is inboxing me on Facebook trying to get me to accept a young earth. Shaking my head. So that from Carmel Crunk, I guess. The one thing about that is creationists seem, they're very persistent, and that seems to be their gospel. I think with any ism, whether it's creationism or dispensationalism or Calvinism, somehow that has the kind of the power of an idol to push the gospel aside, and that becomes the gospel. Calvin or or Ken Ham or whatever, that becomes the gospel message. And so with that comment, Carmel, I want to thank you for watching, and all of you folks at home, thank you for watching. I think we're going to be back more often now. We've taken some time off. Joelle and Leah, it was a pleasure speaking with you, and we're so grateful to have you on. I'm going to give Christine the last word, and then we'll see you all. Keep an eye on the calendar.
Yeah, I think we
Thank
have
you
our
very
next
much.
in a couple weeks, maybe July 10th, I believe, possibly with April Cordera from BioLogos to talk about the new BioLogos Integrate curriculum. So that'll be exciting. And yeah, thank you for joining us. Do either of you have any final comments that you would like to share with our audience before we go? Joelle?
Thank you for having us. Thank you for
Leah?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much for having us. This has been fun.
Oh, it was a delightful conversation. We really appreciate your thoughts today.
Okay, folks, we'll see you next time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.